So we're here today with our friend Ken Fulcher. Ken, as well as being our newest Arizona drag racing legend, Ken's into a lot of things and had a lot of great successes. But in the early days of his career, he was a die-hard, hardcore drag racer, and has a great story to tell about that and the things he's gone on to since. So, Ken, welcome.
Thank you.
So, I've always known you as the guy that at one time worked for Chuck at Chuck Speed Center, and one time did this, and the guy that crashed Chuck's car.
Yes, I did.
And fortunately, you walked away from. But I really know you from your highway choppers and stuff. But let's talk about your early days and how you really, what was your passion? So where were you born?
Born here in Arizona, basically Tolleson. Moved to Glendale when I was 5. My family moved there. Dad bought some property right on Glendale Avenue on 67th, and that's where I was raised. And I live in the same house I lived in when I was 5. So I have really not moved off the block yet.
Parents didn't kick you out, or what?
Well, a couple times.
Okay. Deservedly so.
Yes.
So you grew up in the Glendale area where we had, great restaurants and people like Marty Robbins and a lot of famous people from Glendale back in the day. But what I know about you is one of the most really fantastic is that you went to Glendale High School.
I did.
And Glendale High School, for some reason, has a plethora, and I got to use the word plethora in there.
Oh, there you go.
It has an amazing amount of students that were gearheads that have gone on to drag racing, circle track racing, hardcore racing of all types, and you're one of them. So back, what year were you in high school?
First year of high school was 1960.
So what, were you already a gearhead before you got to high school?
Pretty much. About the age of 10 or 11, my brother and I started flying model airplanes. So we were doing gas motors on little airplanes, U-control. And then we'd step up into bigger and better airplanes as we grew. And we started racing what was called a rat race in the national events. It's basically like it's like a car race. There's 4 people in the circle. Everybody, when they drop the flag, you have to start the motor, let it go, and you have to. When you're in the circle, you have to walk the circle with 4 other guys, and really, it's you're playing faster than his. So, and you have a 35 lap event with no pit stop. Then you have a 60 lap event with 1 pit stop. And then you have a 135 lap event with 2 pit stops. So when the plane runs out of fuel, your pit crew has to grab the plane, fuel the plane, start the plane, and get it back in the air. So we were flying model airplanes constantly.
And these are all tethered back then?
These are all U-control with lines, 60-foot lines. And when we were like 12, 13 years old, we were competing against 40-year-old guys. And in national events, the big companies would show up with their teams, like Vico would show up with their race team and enter the same contest that our 12, 13-year-olds were in it. And I won, 2 years in a row, I won first place in rat race, beat all the competition. I ran first place, my brother went second place. So 2 years in a row we did that, and the big boys were upset that a local 14-year-old could beat the big gurus.
Who was this punk, and where did he come from, right? You were that guy.
I was that guy, yes. I was that guy, yes. And so that gas motors kind of thing started us in cars. Both me and my brother both been into cars and motorcycles and anything that had 2 wheels or 4 wheels. And so when I first went into high school, let's back up to 8th grade. 7th, 8th grade, I have a cousin, his name is Dean. He had a 57 Ford, 3-speed, 312, fast car. So one day he says, "You been to a drag race?" And I go, "No." So he says, "Okay, we're going to go to the drag race. So we went to Perryville, and I'd never been to a drag race before, and I didn't know who anybody was. I just saw all these cars, going down the strip, and I thought it was great. And so Johnny Loper was there with his 40 Ford, and a bunch of other guys that now I didn't know who they were at the time, but now I do. And so that kind of got me hooked. So we started looking for a car, and I hadn't got a driver's license yet. So by the time I was 2 years before I got a driver's license, we started looking in want ads for cars, me and my brother. He's 1 year behind me, so whatever car we bought, we were going to have to buy it together, and I was going to have to drive him wherever he needed to go. So my dad come home one day and says, "Hey, a friend of mine's got this old car for sale, wants to know if you're interested." And we said, "Well, what is it?" And he says, "Well, it's a 1930 Model A coupe." So me and my brother thought about it, and we go, "Yeah." And at the time, his wife was using this car as a paper route car. She wanted a little Toyota truck. So she was ready to sell the car. So I told my dad, yes, we want the car. And so the car, we worked mowed yards all summer long, and the car cost us $150. And they drove it from Wickenburg to my driveway for $150. And the car was running, ready to go. So we tinkered with the car. It ran. My dad would take us out on the back lot, taught us to drive the car, and that's what I had this car. We fixed it up, drove it to high school, drove it to college, drove it when the race cars were broke. You get back in it, run parts in it, whatever. And I still have the car, the very first car I ever bought, and I still own it.
It's quite the car. I saw the video of the resurgence of it, and it's really amazing.
Yes, and the car had been sitting since 1980, and I just got it running again. So I'm driving it again.
That was your first drive?
That was my first ride.
Okay.
And that was the first car I drag raced. I drove it to Beeline, from Glendale to Beeline.
And what did it turn in the corner mile?
Probably in the low 24s. Something like that. But I had another friend that had a Model A, and he wanted to drag race, so we would go to Beeline and drag race our Model A's. And I had a big Beeline oval sticker in the window, and of course everybody thought it was a hot rod, but it was a stock Model A.
What was your ride?
That was it.
So you drove that to high school.
Dated in it, drove it to high school. It was my car.
So in high school, we talk about the people that went to Glendale High School. So who are some of the people that?
Jerry Miller. Me and Jerry Miller had shop classes together. Bob Ream. We had shop classes together and went to high school together. Trip Shoemake. Lots of guys. Lots of gearhead guys that just, all we did is, lunchtime we'd gather in the parking lot and look at our cars.
That was a spectacular group of people you went to school with, and all legends, all real true legends. So you moved on in through high school. Did you build another project vehicle, or did you?
Well, I was driving a Model A, and I was working at a gas station in I got the job in 63, late 62, early 63, at a Chevron station at Glendale and 51st Avenue. And I worked there. And a friend of mine had just bought a 64 GTO. And he goes, "You want to go for a ride?" And I go, "Yeah." So, I was always interested in fast cars, and I was drag racing the Model A, so he put me in the seat of the GTO, and I thought, wow, this is something. So I went down to Mecum Pontiac. I was 18 years old. Went down to Mecum Pontiac and started looking at cars. Well, I went to every dealership to look at fast cars. I went to Ford for the Mustang. I went to Oldsmobile for the 442s and drove all those things, but the Pontiac, for some reason, to me, had a little more class, a little more horsepower. So I ordered a brand new 65 GTO. And it took forever to get there because they were on strike. But and I went to the bank to get a loan, and my mom says, I'm not signing for you, but I happen to know the manager of the bank, Thunderbird Bank in Glendale, and literally he gave me a new car loan on a handshake. And he said, there's only one stipulation. You have, when the car comes in, I have to look at the car. You got to bring it by here and let me look at it. And I said, that's fine. And I did. So I basically got a loan at 18 years old without a cosigner.
I think you probably surprised the guy that was selling the car too, that you actually got the loan.
The dealer couldn't believe it. Yeah, the dealer, Meekum, my salesman couldn't go. He goes, nobody does this. And I go, well, when you know people, I guess that's what happens. And so anyway, I got a brand new GTO, and I street raced the heck out of that thing, and I raced it at Beeline. And a friend of mine had another GTO, and we'd always go race together, and Bob Ream was always there tuning and whatever he wanted to do to it, to make it go faster. And so then in '66, I took the car and I wanted to go look at the brand new GTOs. And this 65 was really fast. And I looked at the GTO, and the same salesman came out and he goes, hey, for $10 more a month, you can have a brand new GTO. And I go, well, maybe. Yeah, let's do that. Well, that was a mistake, because the 66 GTO was nothing like the 65. It didn't run at all. So I'm working at the gas station. I got this brand new car, maybe a couple months old. And guy works at the gas station with me. He's an Air Force guy, and he wanted a brand new car. Well, he was driving a 55 two-door Bel Air. Nice little car, V8, 3-speed on the floor. And I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I'll give you my car, you take the payments, you give me your car. He goes, done deal. And from that day on, 1966, I have not been without a 55 Chevy. I've owned 26 of them. They've all been two-door sedans, except for 3 Nomads. And I still have a two-door sedan today and a Nomad. So that car I took, that I traded him, and then of course I knew Chuck. I met Chuck Forsty at that time in 1960. I think I met him in about 65, and he was working out of his house. He was working for Valley Dodge, working out of his house, building transmissions. He was a transmission guy. Hydro by Chuck was his famous thing that he liked to put on the side of cars. So I got to talking to him, and got to be real good friends with him, and we would go out Saturday night and cruise Central, and good guy, super guy. So I said, then he told me, he says, well, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to start a pizza shop. I said, great. I said, when you get up and rolling, here's what I want to do. I would like to take this 55 Chevy and build a really fast street car. He goes, okay. He says, well, we can do this and this and this, and so mine was the very first car in his shop for a major project for him. So we took the whole car apart, chopped the frame at the firewall, tubed the frame, put an axle. He did all the work, and put a old Chrysler Marin under it. I went to Rudolph Chevrolet, talked to Lou Grubb, and he sold me a crate 425 horse 427 for it, and we bought a brand new Muncie for it. And Chuck kept saying, maybe we ought to put an automatic in it, because he was the automatic guy. I said, no, we're going to put a 4-speed in it. I go, okay. So he built the car, and about 1 month after I had it on the road, it would actually pull the wheels. It would pull the wheels about 2 inches off the ground in first gear. And I'd hit second gear. I'll always remember this. I hit second gear, and the car just went, boom, nothing. A motor would wind up. You could put the transmission in any gear. Nothing was happening. So it twisted the main shaft off inside the transmission about that far. So we towed it back to Chuck's. He put a new transmission gear in it, new main shaft in it. It happened again in a month. And I go, I can't afford this. And I'm working at a gas station. And I said, what about an automatic? And he goes, now we're talking. So he built a 4-speed hydro for it, put it in, and that was the most fun I ever had. That it weighed a lot. It gained weight by putting the hydro in it, but it was such a kick to drive on the street with a 4-speed hydro, and at the drag races. So that's how we put his name on the car. I drove it on the street for almost a year and a half as a street car, and then I wanted to turn it into a drag race car, so we took the sheet metal front end off of it, put a tilt glass front end on it. Didn't really change much on the motor. It was just pretty much a stock motor. Put an Urson cam in it because he was an Urson dealer, and the car went at its. The last time I raced the car, before I had built a brand new big block for it and a clutch flight, and that's what I was going to put in there. So the last time I raced the car, it went 11 O's, and I was going to stop racing the car, sell that engine and transmission, and put the new one in. So I sold the motor, sold the transmission, and Gary Hedspeth come along, and he goes, "Hey, and I want to buy your chassis." And I said, "Okay, well, maybe I'll look for a 55 Chevy or something that's a little lower to the ground, a little more, aerodynamic." I said, "Okay," so I sold him the chassis. So 2 weeks later, he comes back, and I've got this brand new motor and transmission ready to go in, something. And he goes, "I can't wait. I can't wait. I have to race. So can I buy your engine and transmission?" And I said, "Oh, okay." So I sold him the engine and transmission. He basically bolted it together and went to Lyons. I think he went to Lyons and went 990 with the car.
Wow.
From 11 O's to 990. It was a stock 425 horse 427, and then 11 O's I thought was doing really good, and I was hoping to get into the 10s, and he went 990.
So your plan worked, but it just wasn't. You weren't driving.
Yeah, I wasn't driving the car. No. And sadly enough, he was killed in the car.
Right.
At Mel Larson's.
But your theory worked, and the car. It was a pretty stable car as you built it and sold it. And
yeah, he did some modifications that I wouldn't have done, but that was totally up to him.
So I know along the way, you worked for Chuck.
I did. I worked for Chuck.
So the 65 that got away, you eventually replaced it.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know that you have a Chevelle.
I bought
your non-Pontiac.
Yeah. I bought in 1969. I bought a brand new Chevelle from Rudolph Chevrolet, and I still own it.
Still own that. So I know you have this penchant for hanging on to the right cars.
It's a big block SS, big block, orange, vinyl white top, white interior, power steering, power brakes, air conditioning, all the stuff, and it still has the original paint on it.
So you did all that. So you're working for Chuck.
Yeah, in 71, I think, I was working at Goodyear Aerospace as an aerospace machinist. And I got laid off. And Chuck heard that I got laid off, and he needed a machinist in the machine shop. So he calls me up and he goes, "Hey," we've known each other forever, so he goes, "Hey, you want a job?" And I go, "Well, I'm an aerospace machinist, not an automotive machinist." He goes, "There's no difference." He says, "Come down here." So I went to work for Chuck, and he taught me what, engine balancing, line honing, engine block boring, all the stuff. I mean, the full machine shop deal. I already knew what tolerances were and how to read mics and all that stuff, so it was a pretty easy step. So I balanced motors for him I worked for him for 10 years. And during that time, he built a Corvette. And a lot of people drove the Corvette. He drove the Corvette. Bob Hayes.
He was told he wasn't allowed to drive the Corvette.
His
wife said no more of that. Or what?
Well, yeah, kind of. Yeah, his wife went with him to the drag races one time and watched him drive the Corvette and said, "You need to find a driver." So he had Bob Hayes drove it a little bit. Carl Hunsteiger, I think, drove it a little bit. Tripp drove it, and one day he come to me and goes, "Hey, I need to put this thing on the racetrack and get some, some use out of it, and you want to drive it? And I go, sure. So I drove it for about a year, and I drove it. I went to Beeline, I went to Mel Larson's, I went to Tucson with it, campaigned it all over the state, and he would just hand me the keys to his Suburban and trailer and truck and the race car and say, go race. And he'd give me some money for gas.
That was definitely an iconic car of the time. And
National record holder. It was a really fun car to drive.
People
really
knew that car
fun.
really. Tripp was the guy for the long time in the car.
Yes, Tripp was. Yeah, he actually took
Tripp
it back.
Shoemake.
He took it back east. Tripp Shoemake took it back east and campaigned it back there. So every little town he'd stop in, he'd go to a burger joint with the race car on the trailer and find a race, and he'd go make some money. That's how he survived. That's what he told me. So yeah, I raced the car. And then the Winter Nationals of '71, I think, I went to Beeline, and that was the end of the car. Time trials, Fast Eddie Sharpman was in the right lane, I was in the left. We pulled up, and the flagman, the starter, come over to my car and says, "Hey, watch this guy." He says, his car, it's a brand new car, and it's all over the track. I said, okay. So we both pull the line. I let him go first so I could watch him, and he pulls out, and I take off. And he gets to the end of the track, and he starts slowing down. And I got full throttle. And right before the lights, he makes a left-hand turn in front of me. So either he thought I broke or didn't. He wanted off at the very first turn, right behind the wind light. And so it was either like he pulls in front of me and I'm going, uh-oh, this is not good. So it was either drive through his door or try to get around him. So I tried to get around him, and the car left wheel come off the strip into the dirt, sucked the car off the strip and started sliding sideways at 130 mile an hour. And then it was Winter National, so there was tons of people there. The retaining wall ran almost to the wind light, and I look up and all these little kids are sitting on the retaining wall, and I'm going, this is not going to turn out well. So I cranked it to the right hard as I could, and it broke the front spindle off the car, and it started flipping. So it went between the retaining wall and the wind light. It flipped about 9 times at 130 and landed upside down, and I hit the seatbelt release and my head hit the ground and I crawled out.
The pictures, I'm sure that we'll post a picture of that car, but definitely knew the Lord was on your side, because
Absolutely.
That was a horrendous crash.
Absolutely. Yeah, somebody was riding in that car with me.
Yeah. Was that your last time drag racing?
That was. Yeah.
But you've had a great career. You enjoy the drag racing.
Yeah, and I felt horrible that happened, and I felt indebted to Chuck. And Chuck him and his wife were just wonderful about it. They go, I'm glad you were not injured. The car can be replaced if we want to replace it. And then about a month after the crash, Chuck came to me. I was still working for Chuck, and he came to me and he goes, he said crashing the car is probably the best thing that could have happened. Now I can go hunting and fishing and not have to go to the drag races anymore.
He loved his fishing, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
He did. Hunting and fishing, yes.
But you learned a lot from Chuck.
He was a really good mentor for me. He absolutely, all his knowledge, he was free with. He would tell you how to do a job, how he wanted it done, and he was a great guy. And I told him that before he passed away.
We're very blessed to have had him in our life, and so many.
Yeah.
Not only drag racing, all racing, all motorsports.
Yep. Yeah, we built sprint car motors, all kinds of stuff.
I mean, it was Chuck's Speed Center. Mm-hmm. But you moved on from Chuck's.
Yes, I told Chuck, my brother had a little motorcycle shop. He was working out of his garage, and he got a little motorcycle shop, and I was doing all of his machine work through Chuck's Speed Center. And Chuck told me, he goes, I do not want bikers here. And I go, I understand that. I said, can I just bring the machine work in? We'll pay for the machine work and I'll take it back. And he goes, yeah, that's fine. So I worked for about a year doing all my brother's machine work on lower ends motors, Harley motors. And we kind of kept track of how much we were spending with Chuck. So at the end of a year and a half, we figured it out and we go, well, we could probably buy our own machinery and do it ourselves. So I told Chuck that I would be leaving because I'm going to start my own business, me and my brother. And he goes, are you sure? And I go, yeah. He was worried about my success, and I said, yeah, I'm sure. I think this is going to work. And he goes, well, you know, motorcycle is just a fad. And I said, well, so is speed shops, and I think you've done well. So years later, he told me yes. He said, you made the right move. He said he was proud of what I had accomplished, and we've been in business 45 years. So
was always somebody you could still call if you had a question or reference?
I could call him anytime, and he always knew who it was on the phone because I would never say, hi, Chuck. I always used his first name. I'd say, how's it going, Daniel? His name was Daniel C. Forsty.
So that's
I called him Daniel. So, and every time he'd answer the phone, I go, hey, Dan, what's going on? So he'd know who I was.
So, but you worked with a lot of great people through that time, and Jerry Miller and Bob Ream and
all those
Bob
guys
Hayes
worked at Chuck's, yes.
I mean,
Trip.
Trip.
Yeah.
You know, it's like unbelievable. And Chuck, I want to take some time. Chuck was well known for his mentoring of other people.
He was.
I knew to the very end. You know, a friend of mine worked there, and he was expected to learn something every day, and tell Chuck what he learned every day. What'd you learn today?
Yep.
Would you not? And if he didn't, he said, well, how about this?
Yep.
And he learned something, even if it's something he learned on his own.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck, a lot of great people, whether it's performance or other great things, even if they didn't go into automotive,
Mm-hmm.
the responsibility and skills and the skill sets he taught people to be good workers was invaluable, and should always be remembered for that more than just Chuck Speed Center.
Yeah, I had about 3 great mentors in my life. My dad, my boss at the gas station. He taught me how to change tires, change oil, change spark plugs. I mean, and he was not stingy with his information. He was not, he wanted you to learn, mm-hmm. so he could be confident that you could do the job. And then when I went to work for Chuck, the same thing. He was a great mentor for me.
So Chuck had the mentality of you hire good people and get out of their way.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you went on to this little motorcycle thing.
Yeah.
The fad, and you've been doing it for 40 years now.
45.
45.
That's 45.
With your brother.
Yes. Yeah, which is amazing to start with.
And it's called Highway Choppers.
It's called Highway Choppers. The reason it's called Highway Choppers, my brother had a little motorcycle shop on Butler and the access road of the freeway, right where Bobby McGee's is. So they were looking for a name for it, and they thought, well, the highway's out front, let's just call it Highway Choppers. And so now we don't do choppers anymore, we do restoration work. We get restoration jobs from all over the world, and we're very busy.
The great thing about this is that I never got into motorcycles because I was too clumsy. I could ride a motorcycle out in the desert and the
mm-hmm.
dirt,
Mm-hmm.
but on the highway I was like,
mm-hmm.
too many things to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
I said this wasn't the thing for me, but I always had
mm-hmm.
loved beautiful motorcycles,
mm-hmm.
and some of the nicest and most beautiful
mm-hmm.
motorcycles I've ever seen are the ones that
mm-hmm.
Highway Choppers has
mm-hmm.
recreated for people.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about bikes that are 100 years old,
mm-hmm.
and there are no parts available.
Right.
And you're able to do that, and your patience and your people want your work. They know to stand in line, and that's quite the accomplishment for you and your brother. And
mm-hmm.
and one thing we haven't talked about is your bride.
Mm.
So how did you meet?
Well, she was dating my brother. So she figured, I don't know, they dated shortly, not very long. And so I thought, well, she already knew my mom and dad, and she was always hanging around. So she worked at the bootlegger, and she sold jeans and stuff. So I went in there one day, and I said, hey, we're all going to go out on the desert and we're going to rip bikes and we're going to go out motorcycle riding. You want to go along? And she goes, sure. So we did that. And then the next weekend I was going to go to the sprint car races, and she's kind of had, we were talking, she goes, you mind if I go with you? And I said, no. Well, then that's how we met. So we started doing car things, basically, you know, motorcycle riding, cars, and racing, and all that stuff. Although I took her to Beeline, and she wanted for me to reenact what happened at the drag race strip when I crashed the car, and I did. And so she said, well, this was like just before we got married. She said, you promise me you'll never do that again. And I said, okay.
And when did you get, what year did you get married?
1973.
So you've been married now for almost 50 years?
Yes, yes, yeah.
And
yes.
she's always been a big part of your life?
Yep, we have 2 kids, 2 girls, Erin and Heather. Erin was first. She lives now in Kennewick, Washington. She has twin boys, and I don't see her much, but we FaceTime quite a bit. And my other daughter is a college professor, which I don't know how that happened. She got that from her mom, not me. She's the head of the English department, and
Where at school is this?
at Australia Mountain Community College.
That's great.
And she lives 2 doors down with 2 boys. She lives 2 doors from me, and so I see them all the time. And I get to take them to school at times, and when she's not feeling well.
What do they call you, Grandpa? Or do they call you, what's your name?
Papa.
Papa.
Yeah.
So when you hear Papa, it melts your heart, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one's 15, going to be 15 in 3 days, and he'll be getting driver's license pretty quick. And the other one is 7. So a 15 to 7-year-old, and in Kennewick, Washington, they both turned 12 this last summer.
So the great thing about life is that, you know, your family, your God,
Absolutely.
and your friendships, and
Absolutely.
the people. You've done more. Your career has been more in motorcycles over the body of your work, but you met a lot of people in automotive that were great friends and relationships that you've kept, and you're well thought of by many people. And we're proud to consider you one of Arizona's drag racing legends, because you've done a lot, and you've been there. And you know, in your experience with Chuck Speed Center, because we recently honored Chuck, and
Yeah, I know.
unfortunately we couldn't interview him, but
Right.
you know, he was such a great guy,
Right.
and did so much for everybody. And I also know that you do things for people. When people work for you, they they do it right. You do the same way that Chuck taught you, and your guy that owned the gas station taught you, and your dad taught you. You mentor other people as well, and that's part of what makes you a legend. And your passion for everything you've done, and we truly appreciate you. And it's great to have you here today.
It's an honor to be here.
Ken Fulcher, you're like it or not, you're an Arizona drag racing legend. God bless you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.